At this time, I will introduce Haley Babb, who will be the moderator for the student panel. Haley.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Tanja. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Haley Babb, and I'm an Open Education Project Manager at Spark. I'm based in Treaty 6 territory, or what we now recognize as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And I can't underscore how excited and honored I feel at the opportunity to moderate this session. My own open education journey started in student leadership, and it holds a very special place in my heart, as I know it does for so many of you watching today. I'm very excited that the Open Education Conference has continued to include a student keynote panel as it has in previous years. Students are at the heart of this conference's strategic vision, as you know, we all ultimately do what we do in service of learners all over the world. With that being said, I would like to take a moment and call back to some of the remarks in this year's opening plenary session that remind us that students are not only the future of this work, but the world that we live in. And I hope that as we go through this panel, we can consider what active allyship to students might look like, whether it be sharing our knowledge or resources with them, opening doors for them, or simply securing them a seat at important decision-making tables. And most urgently, I want us to consider how we as a community can meaningfully uplift and amplify student voices. So I guess without further ado, we can start doing that by hearing from a few of them directly. I'm going to ask them to each take a few minutes to briefly introduce themselves and share a little bit about where they're joining us from and how they got involved in open education. So I'm just going to go through alphabetically. I have 5 incredible students with me today who I'm so excited for you to meet. And we'll start with Alan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Alan Colin Arce. I'm a first-year master's student in sociology at the University of Victoria in Canada. And before coming here for my master's, I did my undergrad at the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico in the city of Toluca, which is 1 hour away from Mexico City. And when I was doing my undergrad, I had the opportunity to work in the development of an OER about the sociologists Max Weber and Marian Weber. And I was very happy and honored to be part of this project because it's one of the very few OER in sociology that are created in Spanish, and all of the content there was created by students. I also have some experience with the Canadian context in open education because I worked in the creation of an annotated bibliography on OER and digital pedagogy at the Electronic Textual Cultures Lab of the University of Victoria.
Thank you so much. Next up is Anna.
Sorry, I can't open my video because the host has stopped it. So can the host allow me to share my video? Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. Sorry for that. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Anna. I'm 21 years old and I'm a fourth-year medical student in Greece. And right now I'm the external affairs assistant in the Standing Committee on Research Exchange and the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, which I'm part of the delegation right now. So I have been engaged in research exchanges in the past 3 years. And basically through this field, we are working on all aspects of research, and one of which is open science, through which, of course, I learned about open education, and I have worked on a relevant policy document and relevant sessions for medical students to be able to educate it more in open science overall and in open education.
Thank you so much. Alex.
Hello, I'm Alexandra Taylor, sorry, and I'm coming to you from British Columbia, Canada. I am a fourth year political science student and also an employee of Kwantlen Polytechnic University. My start with open education would have been around 4 years ago. Yay, KPU. Would have been about 4 years ago, and it was the first research assistant job that I had ever had. And it was just an amazing experience. Since then, I'm currently working on my fourth OER project, and I am very passionate about the opportunities that open education resources have for creating accessibility in education. I am part of KPU's accessibility committee, and so I just think that OERs have this really amazing opportunity and untapped resource. But I will pass it on to the next person. Looking forward to chat.
Thank you so much. Dana.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Jamaluddin. I was born in Toronto to Lebanese parents, making me a first-generation immigrant, as well as a beneficiary of Treaty 13, otherwise known as the Toronto Purchase. I had the privilege of completing my bachelor's in political science at Concordia University, and eventually went on to get my master's in education at University of Ottawa, where the focus was on leadership, policy, and curriculum studies. I afterwards went on to get my bachelor's of education at Trent University, where I had the opportunity to work alongside Terry Green and many others as a student co-designer on the Liberated Learners Project. Today, I'm speaking to you from Ngoja, otherwise known as Peterborough, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here, and I'm so thankful to have listened to various keynote speakers who were just so fabulous, and so thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, you are up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I am currently in Portland, Oregon. And I went to Western Oregon University in Monmouth, Oregon, which is where I received my Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice. And that is where I got exposed to open education. One of my criminal justice professors was actually a part of an organization called the Regional Leaders of Open Education. And I was always very outspoken and passionate in her classes. And so she reached out to me, and she asked me to apply and to be a part of this organization. And I ended up getting accepted. And so I was able to come to, spaces very similar to this and talk about my experiences as a student, specifically surrounding open pedagogy, textbook affordability, and just the imperativeness of implementing the ability for students to have agency, specifically in higher education. And so that really motivated me to keep working on open education at my university. So I ended up doing it's at my school, it was known as the largest project essentially that a student can do. And it was a competition, and I really like winning. And so the purpose of it was to pose a problem as well as a solution to that problem. It didn't have to work. It just had to be, it taught us to critically think about things in society. And so I did mine specifically on open pedagogy and textbook affordability in higher education. And after many, many months of worrying, I ended up winning the competition. So not only was it just a very prestigious award, but I also got $5,000, which went towards my tuition in my master's degree, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm at Portland State University, and I am 5 months away from getting my master's in public policy with a specialization in leadership and advocacy. And Arlo has been a really integral part of my life. And I was very fortunate to be a keynote speaker at their 2022 conference in Boston, Massachusetts. And it was just such a life-changing experience. And I just love the people part of the organization. And I just hope to have them in my life for a lifetime. And so that's a little bit about me.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Wow, I'm so excited to dive into these questions. This is going to be a really fantastic conversation. So I'm going to start things off keeping us very broad, high level, and just simply asking each of you what open education means to you. And happy to go in any order, whoever feels ready to kick us off.
I can start. So it is such a broad question. Open education has so many different meanings. I think it's meant different things to me at different points in my life. Currently, I'm a teacher with Toronto District School Board, and so the meaning it has there is a bit different than what it did as a student. But really, I'd like to focus on just the fact that teaching is so broad, open education is so broad, and I think a focus should be on what we give credit to and what we don't. If we think about our Indigenous teachings, we think about our generational teachings from our own families, our own elders. If we think about, the teachings we get from different experiences we have in our life, I think that oftentimes those don't get enough credit. And so I really think open education is about giving different voices the platform and the credit and the value that they deserve to exist and be heard. I think it's about giving students the feeling of belonging, the students the feeling of agency. And I think it's also just about being open-minded to various perspectives. And I'll pass it off to someone else.
I don't mind going next. So open education to me, I really look at it in terms of this is an opportunity where we have information and valuable resources that are on electronic devices. And so what that means for me is that education is going to be more accessible for people that have in the past really struggled with being able to get like textbooks online, audio recordings of lectures, audio recordings of different, like just having the OER, having the platform online is huge. But then I also look at it in terms of it kind of takes a layer of gatekeeping out of the education system. So it's not behind this paywall. It's not only available to the people that can afford it. And I honestly think like it's so interesting to hear from people who are on more of like the education side of things and the changes it's making with actually building the OERs. And I'm really looking at how these OERs are like being utilized. So yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Okay, I can continue. For me, open education is an opportunity to reduce and eliminate the barriers for people to access knowledge and to learn, especially in higher education. It was always, for many centuries, it was something that was only available to an elite, and I see open education as a possibility to continue this trend of democratizing access to education and higher education. And I also think it is an opportunity to shift our mindset on how we teach and how we learn from an individualist and this competitive point of view of education to a more collaborative and public-facing view of education.
Okay, I can go next. So basically, it's very similar to what Alan said. For me, open education signifies the democratization of knowledge while also fostering accessibility and inclusivity in the learning process. So particularly in the medical field, I would say like the whole movement of open science, which of course includes open education, is crucial, where access to up-to-date information is very, very important and needed. So to me, it represents a shift in how medical education is approached and how it provides students a platform for them to be able to access a pool of resources and giving them the necessary tools to contribute to a more knowledgeable, empathetic, and skilled health workforce in the future.
I feel like I would be reiterating a lot of what everybody has been saying, but I think I will add just one more thing, and you know, I'll actually put it in the chat. And I mean, this is the whole part of open education. So this was a presentation that I did my keynote on, but a lot of what I talked about in this keynote was how important it is to frame open education, at least when in the context of Arlo, we talked about revolutionizing and decolonizing open education. Specifically in America, we have a very structured system of education, specifically in public education. You know, K through 12, it's a very structured environment. And, you know, even in higher education, when we talk about, I think the same thing kind of applies. You know, for an example, we can talk about syllabuses, and something that I had never even thought about, but that's what critical thinking takes for me sometimes. But to be able to build a syllabus with the professor. And there were professors in the room that had begun doing that. So the students would, you know, talk about deadlines. They would talk about what does exams look like? Do there even need to be exams? How do we measure people's ability to comprehend the material? And that's what we mean about revolutionizing what we think of education. And so that's been something that has been really transformative in how I also approach my own education, and being able to implement self-advocacy and to empower people to you know, speak up for themselves, what they need, because especially when you're in higher education, we're paying to get this education, so we should get the most out of it. And so, you know, we could talk about textbook affordability and a ton of other things, but for me, I think I look at the bigger picture of everything, and it's like, how can we get to a point in society where we are collaborating with education, and it's no longer this competition to be the best. It's about each student and each faculty and each staff member getting the most out of you know, seeing students being successful and understanding what does success look like for students. So that's just something that I've always really thought deeply about with open education.
Thank you so much for that, all of you. I think some themes that I felt like came out of that is this notion of community that we've been talking about all week at the conference, right? Like democratizing access to knowledge, taking away this element of competition and ensuring that, you know, we all have access to the same things and are equally invested in making sure that each other is succeeding. So thank you so much for saying that. I find that really powerful. I want to switch directions a little bit and chat about barriers. So my question specifically is, what barriers do you find students experience with regard to OER, and how can we remove them? So obviously there's a lot of access that comes with using OER, but what still needs improving? How can we make things even better than they are?
I don't mind going first on this one. So I think there's barriers through, for example, like my institution, KPU, all of our online textbooks or our open education resource textbooks are through the Pressbook platform. And although there's a lot of benefits to this platform, it really limits in a lot of ways. I feel like there's better opportunities to utilize a platform that would allow easier syncing with text to speech, and just a system that is a little bit more user friendly. So I think that is definitely a barrier. You know, I think it's great that it's there and we have our subscription with Pressbooks, but it kind of goes back to the fact of like, we can only use it. So because there's so many other options out there, it's unfortunate that some institutions have really decided that they're only going to be putting their open education resources on one particular platform. So yeah, that's what I would say for that for now. Thanks.
I can continue with the barrier side. I noticed when I was in Mexico, And the first one was language. A lot of my classmates in Mexico did not speak English, and this made it difficult because most OER are created in English. So trying to show them some examples of OER, a lot of times they were only in English. And even if there are some OER created in Spanish, the interface of a lot of the OER platforms that we use, like Manifold or Hypothesis or Pressbooks, they are usually only in English. So that is also a barrier when creating OER if every platform that we use is in English. But there are a lot of opportunities to translate or to create our own OER and textbooks in Spanish or in other languages. And another barrier that I found a lot is a lack of awareness, at least in Mexico, because the idea of OER is not as common there as it may be in Canada or the US, where textbooks can be very expensive. And even though Latin America is a region that was a very fierce advocate for open access, open education was not as strong, and there's still a lot of there's still a need to raise awareness of why open education and open educational resources are important in the Mexican or the Latin American context.
I can continue. So I would say specifically in medical education, one very important barrier would be like their reliability and credibility of the resources. So if a student is concerned about the accuracy of the open access materials, this can lead to hesitancy from their side. And at the end, most probably they're not going to use these materials. And at the same time, there's limited awareness and insufficient support from our institutions, which make the situation even harder. For me, overcoming these barriers would include making quality assurance mechanism. This could be done by fostering a culture of collaboration and peer reviewing among medical students and medical educators, which can then contribute to the development of high quality open resources. But at the same time, I think it's very, very important for students to get more educated on open education and why it's important for them to advocate in our countries and in our faculties. So of course, this usually takes a lot of time, and we have to be persistent in order to bring change and try in different ways. It might not be as easy as just going to the dean's office and asking for something to be implemented. But from my point of view, it's very important to try to convince of the importance of open education, convince individual educators that can then spread the word between inside their circles, and then step by step we can achieve this final goal altogether. And additionally, from an international perspective, as today, as I mentioned earlier, I'm speaking as part of the International Federation of Medical Students Associations. We're trying to raise awareness and advocate on the whole open science umbrella, and at the same time create open access materials for medical students worldwide to be used.
Yeah, I think going up. Oh, so sorry. In addition to what Anna was saying, the lack of awareness is sometimes astounding to me, because as that just kind of goes to show, especially on university campuses, just the lack of really awareness of like the university, extending these resources to students. I would think that, it should be the utmost priority for universities to extend these resources and this knowledge to students. But as somebody said in the chat, Paul said it right on the dot. students are always the individuals advocating, along with, I saw at Western Oregon University, the librarians, they were such an integral part of open education, but there wasn't a lot from university admissions. And so that was something that was also very difficult. But another barrier that I see a lot is, I think what a lot of universities that I have seen interpret open education as is by doing, like low cost or no cost textbooks. And so that can look like putting PDFs on campus. And I think that there's this misconception that all students have access to technology at all times, which just is not true. And so while the intention is very good, there needs to be more advocating and an understanding of, so what else can we do? So I've seen professors go back to using paper, and while environmentally that may not be the best choice, that sometimes is the only option for students to get the materials. So there's other things that we should be looking into more about. What does access actually look like? And that's not always through technology, because students often don't have, reliable internet access or reliable, like computers or tablets. And so, I'm still thinking in the background, like what can I do as a student when it comes to advocating? So I think those are like the major barriers that I see.
Go ahead, Alex.
Sorry, I just after what Elizabeth said about just the awareness factor, I know from my experience at my institution, we have what's called the Zero Textbook Cost Initiative. So this means that if instructor has a course that has no textbook cost whatsoever, their course can be deemed ZTC. And this is great for getting awareness out there. But unfortunately, during our registration process for students, because we have more of like I would say, I'm not really sure, but like dated registration system, you have to go through multiple steps to be able to see if your course is deemed zero textbook cost or not. So that barrier there of doing so great in the fact that we're labeling courses zero textbook or zero textbook cost, but it's just that misstep of our infrastructure and our technology with our registration system just can't support that. So anyway, I just thought I would add that in. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I'm so thankful for all the points that my colleagues have just brought up. And when we think about post-secondary education, there's a barrier right at the door. The fact that there's a cost for being considered for a program, not even any guarantees, is, in my opinion, so absurd and so unfortunate, because there are so many people who at that point won't even try for it, because so many people don't want to spend the $100 or $200 that it would cost to potentially not get into a program. And then when you get into the institution, and I agree, these outdated systems that we have, even the work that's been done to get students access to different accommodations is very tedious for students. You can't just ask for extra time if that's something you need. You have to then go through other barriers, like getting access to a mental health professional, getting that documentation, waiting on the university to then address it. And there is a trauma embedded in that. We don't want to have to go through so many different channels with our huge vulnerabilities, whether that's because we have a learning disability or something else, but yet we have to, otherwise we can forget about it. And the fact that we can't just talk to our professors directly about something like that to try to figure that kind of thing out. And the fact that, unfortunately, not all professors would be very empathetic if you did go up to them directly. I remember when a friend of mine got shot, and I was going to miss a quiz that was worth 5%, and I had to send the obituary, I had to send all this evidence, and it's just, at that point, it's not even worth it. And so the amount of onus that's put on each student to advocate for themselves, and the way that makes different students feel when they have to advocate in this way for themselves is so unfortunate. And I think that in itself is a huge barrier. I think another big barrier that's found within these post-education systems is the fact that all disputes are dealt with internally. And so as a student, if you have a complaint, if you want to address something that's gone wrong, you are going to someone else in the university to address those complaints or those disputes. And at that point, can you trust the institution to take your side or to look out for you as a student? Or are you worried that the institution is going to look out for itself? And so that in itself is such a huge problem. There's no third party to go to when the institution is acting in a way that is not ethical or that is inequitable to different students. And there's just and yeah, I'll stop there because I feel like I can ramble on and on, but yeah, those are just things that I'm always pondering and that I think frustrate me when it comes to post-secondary education.
That's so powerful, Dana. And I just want to say thank you for sharing a little bit of your story with us. And I'm so sorry that you and other students have to go through things like that on a unfortunately pretty regular basis. Does anybody else want to speak on that question before we move on to the next one? Cool. Okay. I want to switch directions again a little bit and chat about equity specifically. And my question is, what role do each of you see open education playing in advancing equity in higher education?
This is a big one.
Yeah, no pressure.
I think it's the start, both because it is putting resources on a platform that are more accessible to students, not only those who use learning tools such as a computer and things that help them understand information, but also, of course, the economic barrier that it attempts to eliminate. Right. We all know that there's still the economic barrier of, having a computer, having internet. But I really think that this is a really good start. And I think looking at it as a start is key. If we think of oh, well, if my institution makes sure that all of our classes are zero textbook cost, then oh, we've eliminated the issue and now, there is no barriers and everything's fine. We're going to run into some real problems because it's easy for people who don't struggle to not see the barriers that are there. And so I really think that's why students' involvement with open education resources is key, because students are the first-hand ones using it, and they're the ones that are going to be able to look at the barriers. My institution has an amazing program where we, encourage students to work with their professor in creating open education resources. And it's through this partnership that we've been able to, it's just shined a light on a lot of the things that are missing. So yeah, thank you.
Well, can I say that I completely agree with everything Alexandra just said? And I also, well, of course, we always say that the economic argument of why open education is important to reducing the expenses on textbooks, for example. But I usually like thinking beyond just the cost argument and also thinking about what other ways of advancing equity open education has. And I think one of them is in reducing the hierarchies that are present in higher education, that you as a student can contribute and create an OER or adapt one. And that's even if you create an OER that is not as good, there is always this possibility of improving it and making changes, that what you see on the screen published is not the final word, and that it can always be built upon. I think that is very powerful. And also achieving this equity or trying to reduce these hierarchies among institutions, that you as a, for example, me as someone who was in Mexico in a really small university, could create an OER that could be read elsewhere, or improve an OER that was created in a very prestigious university in Mexico, in Latin America, or the US, whatever. I think that is also a very powerful thing to do, and also vice versa, that someone in like one of these like very prestigious university can improve what someone else created somewhere else in the world. I think that is a very important way where there is equity through open education.
Yeah, I wanted to just take a minute to kind of like think about what my answer would be, because I feel like I can go down a rabbit hole when I talk about equity and open education. Yeah, so yesterday I had shared a little bit about so I have a auditory processing disorder that I was diagnosed with. I was 7, but then at the time, doctors actually had no idea what was wrong with me, and so they diagnosed me with an undiagnosed learning disability. So I've gone through a lot of my academic career having a lot of issues understanding, I always felt like something was wrong with me. And so when I think about, disabilities and open education, they very much go hand in hand, in addition to how I firmly will always say till the end of time what it means to revolutionize higher education. And at the core of all of that is open education. And that can look like a lot of different things. And so for me, what equity looks like is, for example, in higher education, my disability accommodations were, when it came time to exams, I would have to walk across to the other side of campus to go and take my exams in like a small little, like, it wasn't even like a room, it was like a box. And that was really difficult. That was really difficult for me. And I felt like there was just always like this constant disconnect with my peers. And I think that what equity would look like in that sense is by having students build the syllabus and be able to talk with the professor, as just like, you have to think of each class kind of as like their own cohort, and how can professors how can they help students be successful? And success doesn't always look like giving each student the exact same exam and expecting, the same outcome. And I had a really good experience this term of taking a course where the professor sent out anonymous Google Forms, and she asked, she had 3 different options of ideas of what we could do for a midterm. And she was like, but if that's not what you want to do, then tell me what you think you would be, what would be most beneficial to show a reflection of understanding the material. And I have a solid A in that class, and I am able to comprehend the information, and I'm able to engage with the professor in the classes because I feel safe enough to approach the professor. And safety is an imperative part of equity. I have been in like environments where I don't feel safe to approach the professor and talk about my struggles or what I need help with. So that's what equity can look like. That's just a drop in the bucket of what needs to be done in order to create spaces where students can be successful. the other panelists have said, like the financial and economic aspect is also just a drop in the bucket of open education. There are so many other things that need to be addressed. And so, you know, when I really do think about equity, I think about genuinely long-term, big picture. I hope to see a day in society where people can actually afford to go to school. They feel safe to be in school, and they feel that the amount of money that they put towards their education is reflected in their degree, and they are proud of the money that is spent. And so, yeah, I think I'll stop there for now. But that's just kind of an idea of what I think equity can look like in open education.
Okay, I can go next. Of course, as it was mentioned, open education has a very important role in advancing equity within the education field and also the medical field, because it's providing equal access to high quality learning materials and resources. But in this, it's very important to mention that we have to close the gap between low and middle income countries and try to foster equity between the global south and north in our initiatives. So in general, by removing the financial barriers and ensuring that there's universal availability to the educational materials, we can foster a more inclusive and diverse learning environment and make education more accessible to people from diverse socioeconomical backgrounds. But at the same time, open education is also fostering inclusivity through accommodating different learning styles and promoting diversity, and specifically in the medical education, and ultimately trying to improve the healthcare outcomes for underserved communities.
Yeah, I think I will end up echoing a lot of what's been said, but I think generally the mindset when it comes to post-secondary education is that you as a student need to fit the mold. And that I think is the biggest issue. And I think conversations like this whole platform is already revolutionizing that kind of thinking and showing that that's not what it should be or how it should be. In elementary, like we learn that every student is capable. You just have to figure out how to accommodate their needs, and they're all going to have different needs, and that's okay. And so in Elizabeth's story, which thank you so much for sharing, that should have never been an issue. There should never be a question of what you're capable of, what you're not capable of. It's always a question of how we can make this work with you. And I think that's just something that isn't talked about enough in post-secondary. It's kind of like get with it or get lost. And you're made out to be like you're just not cut out for it, but that's absolutely not true. And I think that's just something that echoes really loudly across all these platforms. I think there's a lack of accountability for how these institutions handle their internal disputes and how they also hold their teachers accountable to the way in which they do accommodate or support their different students. During the Liberated Learners Project, there were so many issues. For those of you who don't know, the Liberated Learners was a toolkit built for students considering or attending post-education institutions. And in making the course, we first reached out to students to find out what barriers they learned. And so there were so many topics and issues that I never even considered. For instance, parents who didn't have a space for their kids to be at while they had to be at school to study, is one that I had never considered before. Students who are working hours that make it impossible to attend university. I attended a program where some of the courses were online. And so some of the students, international students, were unable to meet the criteria for their PR being in a program that promised to be in person, but then ended up giving them some online options instead. So, but there's just there's nowhere to go outside of the institution to hold the institution accountable. And the institution is just allowed to just be like, well, kind of too bad, too sad. And, you know, also for students who go abroad and have the courses they're taking abroad be certified and agreed upon as being part of their course load they need to graduate, but then coming back and talking to another person who says, actually, no, this course is one you have to redo because we won't validate it here. And it's just like, well, this very institution told me you'd validate it, but you didn't. And the students' hands are tied. Who do you go to at that point when the institution has then lied to you or made you a promise that they're no longer keeping? So I think that is a really big problem. So I do think accountability is something that needs to be woven through these post-secondary educations in order to advocate for students, because students don't always have the energy or even the platform to advocate for themselves. So, and it's really unfortunate to put the onus on them when they're the ones paying thousands of dollars to be present.
Thank you so much for that, Dana. Does anybody else want to respond or add anything on? Cool. We've got about 15 minutes left and I have 2 questions prepared. But I can sense that we're kind of moving in a certain direction, and I think I'm going to swap the questions from what I already sent to the panelists. So if it's cool with all of you, I would love to make sure that we have time to answer this question, because I feel like it's kind of been woven throughout our answers already. But I want to leave giving some folks in the audience some sort of tangible takeaways. And I want to know what you want people at this conference to know about the student experience. I know that things are so different even than from the time that I was a student a few years ago. And, you know, as we all know, like, students are absolutely not a monolith. There's such a variety of perspectives and lived experience. And how can the people at this conference be allies to you in your work promoting open education? How can they open doors for students? How can they, you know, help you advance this forward? And happy to start wherever, whoever's prepared to answer first.
I could start. I think it's already been echoed throughout this entire conference through some of the recordings that I've watched and through our panel discussion today, but empowering student voices, I think, is a really good place to start, because nothing we tell you today is going to be a fit-all solution for all the things that come to your door. So empowering student voices, giving them the ability to raise the issues with you, I think being approachable is really important. Having maybe the option to give students their voice anonymously if they are worried of what they say to you in person and how they might in turn be perceived by coming to you with certain problems. So I think that is the best place to start, is just empowering those voices, because the issues we bring today won't be representative of all the issues that all the students are going to experience.
I think what I would say to this is that just because it's always been this way, it doesn't mean it needs to stay. So, like, in terms of, like, you know, the inequity we were talking about, how, you know, in higher education systems, we look at the majority of the higher positions are still older white men. And there's just so much, I'm so frustrated with the bureaucracy of how our education systems work, that it's just so frustrating to get any change to happen, any meaningful change. Because by the time you feel like you are comfortable enough to voice the fact that there's an issue, it's going to take months for the person who even has the smallest amount of power to even read or talk to you about what that issue is that needs to change. So I think just institutions being able to break a tiny bit out of the mold that that they feel like they need to fit in with all of these rules that they've just, you know, of course there's systems in place for a reason, but I feel like there's so many rules with bureaucracies that it's just, well, we've always done it this way. And everyone is looking to someone else to be like, well, if you're not okay with changing it, then I guess not. And no one's really comfortable with making any sort of big moves because their jobs are on the line, their well-being's on the line, which is totally fair. But at the end of the day, like, you are impacting these learners at a very, very vulnerable time in their lives when they are trusting you. And when a lot of your self-esteem is really riding on, you know, how well you do in school. I just want to quickly mention that when I was in high school, I was diagnosed with a learning disability, and I was told that post-secondary education just wasn't for me. So it was very much, I was set up to not even have the credentials to get into university. And I had to work really hard on my mental health until the fact that I am able to say now that, like, I'm a employee of a university, which is I'm still grappling with, like, how did this even happen? It's so crazy. But anyways, yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I would reiterate the same thing as Alexandra. I think what was almost harder for me was the almost like silent consensus that just surrounded me. And it was almost like, well, and you know, I'm 23, and so I really sometimes act like it was long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago from being in high school and even in higher education. And I went to college, and that was really great. And I think in some ways I got there because of, one, my work ethic, but also realistically, it was also my pride that I wanted to show everyone who did not believe in me that someone with the severe disability that I had can go on and do really big things. But what I have spent years reflecting on when we talk about allyship, and I literally never cry, but for some reason I feel like super emotional saying this, but my parents instilled, they were my advocates before I could advocate for myself. And so they showed me what it looks like to have a voice for yourself in education, whether it is the K through 12 system or whether it's in higher education system. And what allyship looks like for me, but it should be for every student, is your unwavering belief in that they can be somebody. And that is something that I feel like sometimes was not surrounding me, was this belief in me that I could become somebody. And that was pivotal to whether or not genuinely I succeeded or not, because my ability to keep going was it kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter because I was tired. And so I truly do believe, among all of the many expectations we have for teachers and professors, it's the belief in your students, because they may not have that at home. And I was very privileged to have that at home. But for students that don't, they need to have their teacher be their biggest fan and their ally when they are in the education system. Because if you don't, they will start dropping through the cracks. And I talked about this in my keynote, but that's what we talk about with the prison to school pipeline, is when they go through the cracks. And sometimes it's not even that. It's like they can either go to prison or worse. And we need to be supporting students in safe spaces to become successful. We can no longer have this mentality that students can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Like, they can't. They have to have somebody when they're children, you know? And so, but specifically in higher education, it's that same thing. It's just because we're in there should no longer be these power dynamics that Alan was saying. I mean, there's no reason to have a hierarchy in higher education. The professors are there to teach, and let's maybe switch that around and say, well, maybe students can teach the professors too. It's about collectively working together. It doesn't matter about the credentials at the end of the day. It's about the future of society. And that's what we should really be thinking about when we're talking about open education as well, is we have to acknowledge that, students that are coming into these capacities in higher education and post-secondary institutions, or we're the future of society. We're the future of different systems and institutions. And, when we talk about OER becoming more equitable, by extension, that makes all of the different systems and institutions of society also more equitable. And so I think OER is just the start. And I truly believe that with OER becoming more equitable, I really do hope that we'll slowly start seeing the frameworks of society becoming more equitable, where also those hierarchies are abolished, and we can maybe live in a world where there is more peace and more harmony and more collectivism. So I hope.
Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Does anybody else want to say anything on that question?
I do have one thing to say. I did notice it kind of ties into a question someone asked in the chat about what can be done for students beyond giving textbooks that are costing you an arm and a leg. And I think beyond accommodating students with extra time, remove deadlines, and little things like that, which can go such a long way with someone because you don't always know what's going on in their lives. I think maybe building a community of learners within your classroom, when you're in a classroom in post-secondary education, sometimes those classrooms are 120 students. And even when they're smaller, it's not always easy to get to know your peers. And so the best support can be those peers, but sometimes I think the teacher can have a hand in creating that community, getting those peers together. So maybe having a study group that you create, or just having those discussions in small group and giving those opportunities, any which way that you can build those communities, I think is really important. Because then on top of because obviously you can't be there the way you might want to be there for every single student, but I think that's just one way that you can facilitate that student getting a full frame of support that they would need to survive post-secondary institutions and learning.
Can I also add something? Yeah, okay, great. So I just wanted to focus more on the fact that student experience within open education, it's not only about affordability of education, but it's also about empowerment of the students. So open education provides students with tools and resources for them to be able to take learning into their own hands, explore their interests, and be able to engage in collaborative projects. So to me, it's like a pathway which creates a more equitable and innovative educational system where students are not just learners, but can actually actively contribute to the advancements in their fields. And lastly, I would like to mention that hosting a panel discussion with students, such as this one, to share their views and opinions is a very significant initiative. And the overall effort of the committee to include students and give them space in different topics, different sessions, while also having youth delegations, such as the one that I'm part of with IFMSA, is highly appreciated. So I just wanted to point this out and say thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Anna, and I have to assure you that the pleasure is all ours. It's been an absolute joy to chat with all of you. Elizabeth, I just noticed your hand was up.
Yes, this is just one quick thing. And I feel like, I don't know how I lapsed this, but I lobby at the Oregon legislature for open education. Any single chance that there is any type of bill, really anything that has that requires to go through the Oregon legislature, I am there. Whether I am driving to the Capitol or if I'm just, writing and submitting it that way, the representatives they have to read what I submit, but I also believe in them hearing my voice and hearing my experiences. So if you have the capacity and are able, I think that is also a very effective way to also, I think it was in the chat, whether you're a student or you're a staff or faculty, being able to advocate in that way makes really tangible things have to happen at the state level. So I would definitely urge you all to get involved, do some research on that. And it has definitely been something very impactful in my experience and for the state of Oregon.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Alan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I could just like to say that it is not only one student experience, but it's many student experiences. And as you heard in this panel, like we all bring different life stories according to where we grew up at and where we went to school. And I noticed this just last week when I was discussing with other students in my program. We were all international students except one, and we were discussing about Sci-Hub. And the Canadian student said that she had never heard of it and that she didn't know what it was. And I thought it would be great if we could live in a world where no student had to know what Sci-Hub is, because we all have access to knowledge. So I think we should be striving towards that. And if you're a faculty member or a librarian and you're promoting open education, I think it's important to explain why you are doing it besides affordability, and explain all of these geographical inequalities in the sharing of knowledge, so that students can also become more aware that this is a problem in how people access information. And that's how I got into open education and open access, because a professor in my undergrad explain that for me.
Thank you so much. We're coming right up at the top of our hour, and I feel like there's still so much more to cover, and I feel like we can keep going for a super long time. And I just want to say how grateful I am to each of you, not only for showing up here today and sharing yourselves with us and sharing your stories and your thoughts, but just for what you do on a day-to-day basis, and the work that you take on top of the student work that you're already doing, and everything else that happens in your lives in order to, be here with us today and just to show up in service of this issue all the time. I'm so grateful, and like looking at the reactions coming in on the webinar, like, I can tell that this has really made a difference for a lot of folks. I think we have time. I'm going off script a little bit, but just to do a speed round of like, if you had one message that you could leave this community with in like a sentence or so, if you'd be willing to share that with us. And then I'll take a really quick screenshot of us, actually, just in order to have a photo, and I can sort of Photoshop it so that it's just the students. Cool. So if anybody wants to start off with their just closing message.
Okay, I'll go. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead. No, it's okay.
I think my sort of closing point would just be listen to your students. When, this is usually taken in like a negative way, but like when someone is showing you who they are and they're showing you what they need, like believe them. Yeah, and I'll leave it with that. Thanks.
I think I'd like to say that a message I'd like to leave everyone with is don't ever underestimate your students or anyone for that matter. You know, you might be seeing something that doesn't impress you in regard to a paper they've handed in or whatnot, but at the end of the day, there's so much more behind everyone's lived experiences. And I think if you can in any way tap into people's lived experiences and tie those into the learning that's happening, regardless of what faculty or field you're in, I think that could be so enormous and huge. And I think that could really ignite a lot of passion in your students as well. So yeah, I think just do your best to develop a community of learners, empowering your student voices, and just never underestimate them.
I would say like collaboration is the key. So both educators should make a space for students, but students should be aware and educated on the topic in order to take the lead and actually contribute in the field.
You can go, Alan.
Yeah, I would just say continue raising awareness, continue advocating for open education, no matter if you're a student, if you're a professor, if you're a librarian, just continue doing that work. You never know who might be listening, who is just waiting to learn about this.
Last summer, I was very honored to receive the John Lewis Youth Leadership Award for the state of Oregon. And so I think what I will leave you, I always have to tie it back into public policy, but something that John Lewis said that really stuck with me is he said his biggest fear is that one day he will wake up and democracy will be gone. And when we think about democratizing, education, K through post-secondary education and beyond, I hope that we can continue to fight to create spaces where students, faculty, and staff will always be able to critically think about the world. And I believe that starts with collectivism, and always at the core of that is open education. And so I think I would just leave you all with that quote, and I'll put it in the chat because it's something that I think about deeply.
Thank you so much, all of you, for those closing thoughts. Everybody attending, if you wouldn't mind sort of showering them with a virtual applause if you appreciated the session today. Folks, if you want to smile really quick, I'll take a quick screenshot for us, and I'll try to capture all the applause. Cute. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much again. I can't underscore how much we appreciate your time and your perspectives, and I know that we'll be seeing many of you around this space for a while to come. So can't wait to watch you as you move forward in your career, and I hope that we'll see you back at future conferences.